And then the other thing is, Renata, when the questions come in, I forgot to mention this. If there's any that are, I don't want to say, trying to think, that are leading or anything like that. Again, this is all about trying to provide lessons learned to the government folks at the same time, share your experiences. But if there's anything that's, like procurement sensitive or anything, like Tom and I kind of manage those. We haven't had, I think, but one or two of those over the 2 years, but every now and then they pop in. So
okay.
Just letting you know that we'll manage that as well.
Well, I have I do have responses prepared for those. I have a great comms team. Like if you get procurement questions.
Always good to have a great comms team.
Yeah, they're really good. Because sometimes you get in places and they, we do have a couple procurements out there at the DoD CIO level that I think people need to communicate with industry about, to let them know, look, we're trying to be fair across the board. We're looking for capabilities. As long as you respond to the proposal, checking all those boxes, then we're happy to do the evaluation and get everyone on part of the team. That's the process for me.
It is from an industry standpoint, it has been, the pandemic has created platforms like this that I think are more back and forth and engaging, right? Because
it have to be
right. Well, and it no longer is, it's not as difficult, right? You don't have to get the team and go to the Tyson's and or the Sheridan and Tyson's and hit it. I mean, not that those are definitely good, but just from an informative standpoint.
On the commute, yeah. It's just and then you put it all together. Then you got to get people cleared to get there. Ugh.
Yeah, no, and that was one of the reasons we really kind of started this platform. Was in our working groups, we had a number of folks that were basically looking for like guidance, right? Like in different things around cloud, around modernization. I mean, a lot of the stuff that Tom's team works on, and it was okay. Well, how do we get messages out to to get people to understand what are some good lessons learned that they can do. So
and I tell you, Chris, it shouldn't have took a pandemic for that to occur.
Yeah,
we should have been doing that a long time ago. But unfortunately, there are things that happen within the federal space and acquisition that make us a little bit more heightened in our concern for how we are engaging with industry. I think now we've had enough education and understand parameters, and there's some programs in place that can monitor the bad activities or concerning activities. And those who don't have those concerns and are not driven by personal gain, who those are, because they don't care. It's just like, I'll tell Microsoft what I need. Oh no, I'll talk to AWS. Yeah, I'm going to call. And you consistently do it. I am on a lot of things because of that reason. I tell, the Commandant is like, you can't say yes to one person and no to another because it doesn't look right. So you got to keep engaging. So my team tries to make sure there's a diversity there, because we want the best of breed. We don't just want some hierarchical vendor that got more money than everybody and they get to pull all these big teams together. Sorry, GSA down there, Tom. Sorry.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started as we got folks coming in. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ATARC Cloud and Coffee, the place for discussions on all things modernization transformation. My name is Chris Oglesby with MorphWorks, and my co-host
Tom Santucci from GSA.
Before the introductions, this platform is hosted under the ATARC Cloud and Infrastructure Mission Group with the goal of bringing lessons learned and ideas to the ATARC community. Our focus will be a conversation about our guests' experiences, past, present, and executing modernization and transformation efforts. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. As folks have questions, we'll work those into our discussion. Now let's move into introductions. Today, our guest is Renata Spinks, Assistant Director of IC4, the unit, U.S. Marine Corps. Renata, would you mind sharing with the audience a little bit about your background?
Hey, no problem. Thanks so much for having me here. So, Assistant Director of the Marine Corps, lots of different responsibilities within the IC4. So that's computers, communication, command, and control. So all things technology, having a great time on the warfighting side, I love the traditional enterprise IT, but lots of war fighting capabilities there. And then I have a background with US Treasury, where I learned a lot about data analytics and led a team there, as well as the IRS. Something I hang my hat on is the development of the web application that we all use now today. Is irs.gov/my account. So those are a lot of capabilities I had a chance to lead with the director there. And then before that was Homeland Security and the US Army. So lots of diversity of background that got me to where I am today. And I'm so appreciative of those experiences. Thanks so much.
Excellent. No, thanks for coming. And yeah, I love your background, because you've seen, from a number of different sides and being able to bring that experience. And so would love to kind of dive in a little bit now and really kind of from a conversation that we haven't really had in quite a while is, what coming out of the pandemic, what did some of the positive things that the pandemic's created, and if you can share kind of the top 5, and we can kind of dive into those a little bit and share with the audience.
Yeah, so the pandemic, number one, it showed us that there are many more opportunities within the acquisition space. Understanding rapid acquisition and software development lifecycle traditionally is a waterfall approach. It's gathering requirements, and then you're taking a lot of time and attention for research and development. And so we had a chance to employ agile methods, as well as using the COVID-19 funds that were made available by Congress. And we were able to transition to the cloud. So acquisition and being able to do that very quickly was, I think, a positive stride. So that's area number one. Number two was infrastructure upgrades, because in order to get to the cloud, you have to set conditions with the ability to be able to do so. And circuits that are only maximizing capacity at 115 megabytes, that's not going to get you there. You need at least 10 gigabytes. So that DISA backbone was so critical for us to transition to. So that's number two. The third one, I think, that was critical, that was positive, was our people side and training our workforce and having those opportunities, even during the stop move, being able to take advantage of technology, of platforms that started to be spun up that already existed, mind you. Canvas existed, Google Meet existed, but we did not, I don't think, maximize them as much as we did during the pandemic. And I'm confident in saying that had those COVID-19 based restrictions occurred, we probably would have missed a lot of opportunities to understand those technologies that we could use to educate our workforce. The fourth one is probably the ability to adopt emerging technology. So, and modernizing consistently in the middle of what later became zero trust and White House memos. There was always the buzz of zero trust. It just hadn't been codified in writing with parameters of compliance, which is what we're experiencing today. And then lastly, I would say being able to do things like this. How do we increase our reach? And this is a whole lot better than showing up at multiple conferences, which is great for in-person interaction. But because of the time that it takes to transit to these conferences, you have restricted in capacity of personnel, whereas these platforms allows you to have a little bit more interaction all at one time, versus if Ms. Spinks is standing talking to one or two vendors, versus now I have the opportunity for everyone to hear the conversation all at the same time, and they have the opportunity to glean their value add. So those were 5 areas that I think, I mean, I could go and go and go, but I'll stop at 5.
So, so one of the things that it sounds like is really kind of the business efficiencies, right? That you've been able to, this obviously being an example. So taking kind of your last scenario first, the pandemic, as we move into, kind of the next stage. And I know in DoD, and especially in cyber, there has been a lot of, people coming in, right? It obviously tapered down, but now it's things are starting to tick back up. In the business efficiency side, what are some of the lessons learned that you guys had from, from that area. Obviously, this is one of those, being able to communicate with industry and government folks about your lessons learned. But what are some other business efficiencies that you guys have been able to capitalize on and going forward?
I would say the number one business efficiency that I think was critical to us is how we prioritize the work and how we utilized our workforce. And when I say that, I'm not saying that we were in a culture of wasting people's time. That's not what I mean. What I mean is the in parallel approach was able to provide us more capacity. We got a lot more done by having to shift to that on and out model, up and down from a personnel perspective, where we're looking at 100%, and then we went down to 50%, and in some cases we were at 10%. And so the opportunity to operate at mission critical, there's mission critical, then there's essential personnel, and then right, and so there's different categories of work. Being able to operate there, I'm not gonna say it felt great. Okay. I'm not gonna say that it had, many of us feel like we're superwoman, at least I do. So it tested my superwoman powers, I will say that. But being able to see through the fog of workforce management, it showed us how we could better utilize and where those opportunities were to look at the way our cost was being managed, the way our time was being managed. What does our spend plans look like? What are the opportunities to decommission one thing just to ramp up another? And so it allowed those times to look at those efficiencies and highlight business processes and rules that had to change and that needed to be put in place, Chris.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, Renata, one of the main things is zero trust, obviously, but the overhead on security in general to run an application is becoming increasingly more expensive. What are your thoughts on shared services, and how can we how does the Marine Corps build these enterprise systems, or do you have a lot of duplication in the inventory of providing the same service, or is it decentralized or something? I'm not familiar with the Marine Corps, so give me some insights on how the Marine Corps does business.
That's a great question. I would say that because of the mission set within the services writ large, just the Department of Defense, one would say there is duplicity. But I would caveat that duplicity to be based on the zero trust model. There's role-based access, there's conditions to, your mission as Tom may be different than my mission. So your accesses will be different. So the segregation of duties is so important. Access control is so important. So where there's opportunity for shared services, absolutely. I'll give you an example. One example is everyone in the Marine Corps, and when we think about it, Department of Navy, where are those areas where we can integrate, back into that culture of Department of Navy, being part of the United States Marine Corps. It hasn't changed, but there are opportunities, I think, that we've been not focusing on as much as we should. And so you see that now when we think about employees being onboarded and getting paid. Now that's coming, no matter how you work, what your mission is, no matter where you are. Every 2 weeks, the government is obligated to execute a paycheck, correct? So because of that, why would I have 7 different systems for 7 different entities to pay personnel, right? So those are the things that we have done to consolidate. We just went through a deployment of the DAI system. It is now our system for timekeeping, invoicing, submitting payments for payroll. Almost every action that's based on human resources and payroll from a payments perspective is now no longer in 6 different systems that we had 6 different logins for. So that is a shared service because we don't own that application. Okay. And to give you a little bit of insight in the Marine Corps, we operate at a at an acceptance of risk level that's pretty minimal. So when we start to say you want to come in our environment, so now you have to make sure you have these controls in place. And sometimes that could be a little different than other services or other entities are accustomed to, because if we see moderate, but there's area you accept the risk, well, we're moderate low there. Now, Ms. Spinks, as the CISO, has to have a conversation, say, well, in our environment, we don't accept that kind of risk. We need you to put masking in place. We need to make sure you have this. And so we make it through the authority to operate process within the Marine Corps. We do find those opportunities of reciprocity. So that's something that we are doing. But that is a great example. DAI is a DLA platform. And so we worked with their teams, and DLA for the audience is Defense Logistics Agency, which is now part of the Marine Corps. And so we transitioned to that shared services approach. And we're looking for opportunities across the Marine Corps in that way, internal to us. What are some of the systems that multiple occurrences of the same capability is happening? And how can we consolidate those tools or those systems into one? Which takes a lot of, modernization. I won't say they're legacy systems. What I will call them is the traditional technology that has been in place that we've been accustomed to using. And so in order to do that, you got to have a platform. You have to have SecOps and secure DevOps. And Chris, I know you wanted to segue and talk about that.
Right. Yeah, no, that's actually great. Thank you. It's almost like we had a conversation before, right? So that is cool, right? Because I'm going back in history now, and not going to date myself, but the collaboration between services has always been challenged, and I would say that is one thing that I've noticed more in the pandemic is you start to see more and more. I mean, you hit on it, the shared services model that I think the DoD was probably ahead of the game, back in the day, right? You think about DISA just as the concept of, I mean, I'm dating myself because I remember DISA consolidating their mega centers, right? Back in those days. Yeah. But those shared services, you're starting to see that collaboration between DISA and FedRAMP and, in the services. So
absolutely
in the need to kind of have those shared services Tom was talking about, and the development side, how are you guys kind of collaborating and working in the, you preempted the DevSecops side.
Yeah, so DevSecops is an area of focus that raises the eyebrows of a lot of people. They say Marine Corps is doing what? We have innovation challenges because we have Marines that code. We have Marines that actually are at the Naval Postgraduate Schools. They're at the community colleges in the local area. When I say local area, I don't mean just the DMV. I mean local to a lot of our bases and posts and stations. That means sometimes you may find a Marine down at Camp Lejeune at a community college taking R or taking Python and then saying, hey, Ms. Spinks, here's what I learned. Here's what we're doing. Here's another application that we've either modernized or we've created something that the commander needed so he can make decisions on. About our SharePoint Online migration. Everyone's heard about that. You've heard about the O365. We are working on reducing our data center footprint across the Marine Corps. Yes, there was a congressional mandate, I think 2012, 2013. Yes, there's some NDAA language out there that reinforces it, but we had to do this thing because we had a cyber actor out there that's getting more and more sophisticated. And I'm going to go to the dictionary and get a synonym because sophisticated is no longer the word. They are just focused on every time, we are a target. And every time we pivot to something like telework, well, now they went from intrusion detection and attacking our firewalls to, well, I'm going to do more phishing attacks, up at least 310% during the pandemic. So,
oh, wow.
That, and this has always been a target, right? The services has always been a ginormous target, but then we became boundaryless. So then it's what happened. They got a little bit more sophisticated. You know what? I'm no longer going to target the network. I'm going to target the people. So I need to get credentials. So now I can come inside of the network, obfuscate myself to look normal because there's some trusted updates for discovery of network tools that they use already. So I'm going to go and I'm going to deliver payloads so I can get inside of the network. So I can do that by person and what they have access to. That's why zero trust is so important. So thinking through the adversary, how do you reduce not only the footprint, but I like to say, let's reduce their target space. So that's why you got to reduce the data centers. I'm not saying put everything in one place. That's not what I'm saying. What I like about is defense in depth and zero trust from an access control has been happening for years. You know, when you look at the level of access people have from clearances and things like that. But now you're facing on you're looking on people's identities at the application level, because that's where the data resides. And that is the keys to the kingdom. In the past, yes, the adversary and the many vulnerabilities that we identified were based on how things behave on the network. But that's never been the target. That's been the path. The target is always getting to the data. And so as you think about that, secure DevOps means you have to embed security. You have to, because the way we traditionally used to develop applications is no longer effective enough. Yes, you're going to always accept risk and nothing is 100% secure. But if you embed some of the security protocols and parameters and criteria within the coding environment, what you don't have is, number one, slow to deployment, because what used to occur is our great developers would spend all that time doing development, coding and creating from requirements, making a system execute the activities with zeros and ones, basically in coding languages. And then it's time for test and evaluation for deployment. And then security tells you, you can't release. Everyone's experienced that. So that's why secure DevOps is so important. But I think more important than conceptually is the platform. That, I think, is the most critical piece, because that is not nascent to the services. And I would take a stretch that outside of the financial portions of the government, platforms are not something that was just part of the ethos, right? And so having to make those choices, Chris, it's pretty challenging, because it is not a Brinks truck pulled up to the Pentagon and you get to just say, oh, let's just use all the platforms. That's not what happens.
Right.
So we have to make sure that we find those areas of opportunity. We make sure our critical path of budgeting is there. And the Marine Corps is doing a great job of identifying budget streams. You talked about sharing. So we do look across the other services. The Air Force, the Army's got a lot going on in Austin, Texas. We are not ignoring any of that. So we don't talk about it. No one acts like, oh, why is Ms. Spinks going to Austin? I'm going to look at the platform. You see what they're doing down there? Oh, why do we go up to Kelsey Run? Because we are focused on those shared services and how can we take advantage of all of the great development that's happening within the DoD at our sister services, as well as externally. We visit a lot of the financial platforms. We listen to a lot of the cryptocurrency and financial encryption approaches, because we need that type of security within the services. So not the same type of data, but the same type of concepts that we're trying to employ. So we are a continuously learning organization, and it's an area that the Commandant has prioritized with Force Design and Force Design 2030. And all of the different things that are happening within aviation, infantry, it doesn't matter. They're platforms, and that's data. And so it resides on a network, whether it's a network of networks or a system of systems.
Great.
All right. I got a broad question. My pet peeves are portfolio management, asset management, and configuration management. And a lot of agencies don't tie a lot of those things in. Having built monitoring systems before, you need to see the whole ecosystem and how traffic is flowing through the network and what endpoints are being attacked. So my question is really related to EDR, endpoint detection and response, is knowing how does Marine Corps, I keep saying Marshal Service, Marine Corps, if they're getting attacked at an IP address, Do you know what system that belongs to? What users are affected by that? What systems are affected? Where's the interconnections or interdependencies of that asset? Do you have insight into all that?
Yes. So endpoint security, major area of focus. What we have is a solution that is architected to do three things: discover, identify, and take action. That is the incident response, consolidated based on MITRE ATT&CK and all those great frameworks for us to detect. But building out the endpoints is all about knowing what you have. So yes, we do employ a very small set of tools, which used to be, I want to say 17 to 18 tools. It used to be that many, just saturating your network. Everything, as soon as you turn your computer on, it's trying to do a whole lot of stuff. What we did during the pandemic, because of the cloud migration, we had to focus on some of our equipment, because not only are we changing circuit switches and routers for the configuration management control that you talked about, but now we got some devices that is also, 4 gigabytes of RAM. Yeah, right. Okay, that's a joke. So we did have to look at the actual equipment. So in order to find out, is that end user just experiencing latency on the network, or is there an end user device problem? So we do have a tool that has several sets of modules that we combined with cloud native security, such as Microsoft Defender, HBSS, the Taniums of the world, the ACAS scanning. So there's a unique set of tools, and I'm a cyber first, so I purposely do not give out my solution architecture, but there is a unique set of tools that we use for different functions that is aggregated in a space so that we can run scripts that we set up, in certain times. And it gives us that visibility. The best example to tell you how successful we are with that solution architecting design space was the Log4j. We responded very quickly. It was about knowing where the assets are, because that particular vulnerability was not unique. I think everyone had the same challenge, because you weren't one that was saying, oh no, we don't have that. Yes, you do. You have that capability 9 times out of 10. Another example was the SolarWinds. So we were unfortunately in a test and evaluation space when those things occurred. How can you respond quickly, minimize the risk that you have inadvertently accepted because of an exploited vulnerability? And that's what tests your ability to have asset management in place, know where the licenses are that are running on those endpoints, and oh, by the way, how is that endpoint behaving? And thank you, Doden. We have a 21-day isolation rule. Those CVEs come out, and if you're not healthy in 20 days, MARFORCYBER will isolate you, and that 2-star will get a phone call from a 3-star. And we just have to go through vulnerability management and the rules. So what you think about for Marine Corps is we try to make sure we are as compliant as possible with a risk accepted model that's based on how we manage our assets. And there is a combination of tools that provide certain criticality. Some people give me feedback and say, you should just have one tool. My position is, who's watching the watcher? If I have one tool that's doing everything on my network, how do I know that that particular vendor's tool is behaving the way it's supposed to? Once again, zero trust. I have not trusted anybody all of my life. And I won't date myself and how old I am, but in technology, that's why access controls have been in place, whether it's identity-based, role-based. As long as I've known about technology, whether we called it zero trust or not, it's always been, you have to make sure people have access, whether that's when you were onboarding an employee, whether you were giving them access to a system. We've been doing this thing for a while. So you have to have your assets not only managed, but perfection is the enemy of good enough. Absolutely. But I need a 95% confidence interval on the data you give me for a population of my assets. And that is how we operate within the Marine Corps. It's a culture of precision, specificity, lethality. It's all about warfighting. But the same precision that the Marine Corps has within its warfighting capabilities, and why everyone can admire the stoicness of a Marine. That's the same thing that we do within IT, because we don't have a choice.
So that brings up actually a good tie to this question that we got in the Q&A, and one of your priorities, because what you've talked about is the sharing, some of the consolidation, getting an understanding, but we're moving into kind of a new time, right? You need to you have people that in the past kind of were specialists, right? They were specialists. Now, to your point, you need to make sure you have varying tools. You need to have an understanding of tools. So the question is, what are you doing from a reskilling and upskill as you support cloud and DevSecOps efforts? But I think it's in general, it's one of the things that you talked about, being able to prioritize. How are you really kind of leveraging the ability with your teams to reskill and make sure that you're keeping up with the evolution of technology?
That's a great question, and I like the way you talked about it not just being in one specific area. Do we still develop subject matter experts? Absolutely. The Marine Corps has limited duty officers. We have subject matter expert, highly qualified experts in categories that you have to prove your expertise. However, we also take an approach that everyone is a cyber warrior. Everyone's in the fight, whether that's your traditional cyber awareness training. And a lot of people say, well, that's just clicking the buttons and you just get through it and you get a certificate. Not in the Marine Corps, you can't click through. There's a timer, there's questions that you have to answer if you want to bypass. So we have shifted how we use online platforms to make sure that at least the competence is being received in the instant enough to answer the question. Later on, you have to test it by phishing attempts and things like that to test if that person is susceptible. And then if they click on it, you get the little bling, yeah, you're a victim of XYZ. Here's some good training. That's what we're trying to get to for the cyber warrior piece. But we also have the Information Development Institute, IDI, that the Deputy Commandant of Information has focused on. That is a plethora of certifications, good training to get certificates of training. Even if you say, well, I don't want to take the cert, right? I don't want to take the test, but you still can get the training. And critical to that training is it is no cost to the employee who's taking advantage of that platform. Well, Ms. Spinks, I'm not a great online learner because everyone absorbs information very differently. I'm a hybrid. Some things are in person. I need to be able to ask questions and things like that, and then I can do online. But some people, that's not their forte. That's not how their brain works, and that's okay. So Marine Corps has prioritized all of the years that you could think of. I've only been here 3 to 4 years, but there is a culture of training just based on staying physically fit. But part of the fitness as well is becoming a subject matter expert in what it is you're doing, and in using individual development plans that some people mistake as a PIP. It is not a PIP. It is not a performance improvement plan. It is an individual's development plan. The Marine Corps resources and our M&RA team and our HR team, we make sure that there are IDPs on file, and we sit down with our employees and the Marines and say, hey, what's your next? What is it that you want to do? So it's 30, 30, 20 and 10 or something like that. But so 60% to 70% of the mission is critical for your individual development plan. But there's 10% that says, well, what is it that you want to do? Sometimes you have a person, and this really just happened to me 2 weeks ago. You have someone who's working in finance, but the finance that they're working in is all cyber operational things. So she was very inquisitive on, right now, I know government accept accounting principles. I know the FAR, but I could be more valuable if I just understood this cybersecurity thing. So she wanted to take foundations of cybersecurity. So those are great examples of how we develop our workforce. And rarely are you told no. What happens is, and this is something I like to talk about, because in my previous lives, I did experience, oh no, that person can't be out of the office. oh no, that person can't do this, or oh no, that it was like, wow. And unfortunately for me, until I came to the Marine Corps, I thought that that is how we did our prioritization. As a leader, I thought we have to look at the workforce, see if we can afford to have people out of the office. Who do we balance? And if you can't, you got to push it out. Whereas here in the Department of Defense within the Marine Corps, it was opposite. So that was culturally shifting for me to see. But you prioritize, you say, hey, yeah, get the training. And the next question is, hey, did you make sure you've got somebody to stand in your place? Did you make sure that briefing is going to get done? We do calendar syncs when they're going to be out of the office 1, 2 months, 3 months, or a week, whatever that training is, because people learn differently. So it is 100% prioritized. We definitely have people who take coursework at the community colleges and the local universities. So, you know, OPM is really great with training and development guidelines that we follow very closely. For our active duty Marines, there's a whole approach to that as well for skill development. So I think in the training department and the prioritization of such, I think we're at least 99.9%. And it just depends on how that individual learns. And we do have many options. The platforms like this is very educational. We know that those are also opportunities for training, but we also recognize there's training by experience, there's training by academia, there's training by things like this. And then it's always that continual improvement for lessons learned. So I think we have a hybrid approach to training our workforce and developing our workforce and giving them all those different opportunities. From an active duty perspective, we do have 17XX. That's the new MOS that a lot of people have been hearing about. I don't think it's a shortage of applicants. We're actually turning people around because there's only so many slots. There's only so much, you know, we do have a lot of people are interested in that cyberspace. And so there's Naval Postgraduate School graduates that we have with interns up at MARFORCYBER. So we partner a lot with them within the information technology cyberspace domain. I think we are maximizing as much as we can. And then we're looking at that IDI platform and figuring out how can we expand that? You know, how can we make it better? Outside of IT for workforce development, you know, not a lot of people don't ask this question, but I want to take the time to talk about it. We also do upscaling that's outside of the technical space. We give leadership symposiums. We talk through things like Mr. Stephen Covey is one of the modules that we've adopted. We focus on that. And the DCI likes to say, when we start to talk about that in our staff meetings, it's coined as, oh, DCI is a great place to work. What are we doing for the workforce? And then we kind of lay down leadership, functional development, and technical development. And that's how we make sure that we're addressing the whole of a person so that they don't feel like, well, if it's not IT, I can't take training. Not so. Maybe someone needs to know, how do I communicate in a clear and concise manner in a room full of technologists or a room full of non-technologists so that I can make sure I'm communicating properly? We literally have, you know, coursework that we approve for, you know, methods of communication, conflict management, because we have that supervisory role. And so we make sure that they have that training as well. A lot of people don't ask about that side of it, but we definitely take a holistic approach for our training and workforce development.
Excellent. I love and I know Tom's leaning in for a question, but I love the aspect of the culture of physical fitness and creating that same culture to you know, to the learning and the technical and all the other pieces. I mean, I wrote a blog back beginning of the year, kind of the new, you create all these plans for, you know, yourself from a physical fitness and, you know, really kind of building that organizational muscle, and that consistency is, I think, is key. So sorry, Tom, I know you're leaned in for a question.
No, I love the conversation. This is wonderful. Yeah, I'd like to add on to Babur's question that he had for training, because our Cloud and Infrastructure Committee of Practice, which is off the Federal CIO Council, has actually provided hundreds of Marines cloud training. And I'm really proud of that because we do it for CONUS as well as OCONUS. Yep. There's a lot of bases in Japan, for instance, that we cover. And we do late night courses for that reason alone. But we also tried to, we did a pilot, and you might mention there's a lot of Marines that know Python. Well, guess what? I had 50 Marines on a, 10 o'clock
Yep.
PM call learning Python. We had did a pilot with Trident Community College
Yep.
out of Charleston, South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really successful. It was incredibly. So I'd like to see if we can't do more of that. And there's hundreds of colleges, small community colleges, and everyone thinks differently. Some people like the online in big classrooms. Other people might have to learn in a smaller environment in person.
Mm-hmm.
But the opportunity, we have to create the opportunities for them to learn, and it might be something outside the box for them of their current role. We need to establish, we need to train people for their broader being, because what you're doing today may not be what you're doing 5 years from now, or even 2 years from now. I mean, we've all been in IT. I've been in for more than I'd like to mention, but every couple of years you're doing something different, completely different. And
yeah, absolutely. So definitely, I wasn't going to call it out, but that's why I said we got people learning Python and places like Camp Lejeune. So I wasn't sure if it was Trident, so I'm glad you triggered my memory, but I get those emails all the time, the feedback, and it's great that we have partners that are working on things that are helping us, think outside the box. That the Flow 3 is a technology that we use based on just that thing. Maybe sitting in the house was mandated at one point, but now I have Marines that, they go outside and, they end up at a park somewhere and they got a little MiFi or whatever it is, that however they do it, but they just need to get out of the house. But maybe maybe they are experiencing some challenges where they can't come into the office, or maybe we're at a certain percentage where they've been identified as, we did some blue and gold teams, some red and black teams and things like that. So it was great to see that platforms are being used, but as well as sometimes if I have to take this online course, and this is just some of the feedback I've gotten, I really would rather be in the classroom, but that's not possible. So how do I create a classroom that makes me feel a little different so I can be engaged? And so you see the scenery changes, and I'm sitting outside instead of sitting in the house, or I'm on my deck instead of feeling confined. And those are mental health spaces that we have to be supportive of. And we don't hear a lot about that. It's so much work. But there's another piece of the ethos that the Marine Corps also focuses on, which is making sure that people are okay. And I like that question that I see being asked. And no, the Marine Corps is not perfect. Our suicide rates are just as challenging as, with the veterans and things like that. We're not perfect, but we are focusing and we're trying to make sure that we're thinking about the whole of person, not just within IT, but you see the Marine Corps within IT, the Deputy Commandant of Information. Just yesterday at the Modern Day Marine, we had the DCI, which is Deputy Commandant of Information, and the DCA, which is Deputy Commandant of Aviation. Now, his video was a whole lot sexier than our information, but to show people how the information environment fuses through aviation. The next up is, what does it look like for infantry? When you see these tanks and amphibs pull up, there's a network. Data has to be shared. Commanders have to make decisions. Platforms have to be in place. And not only does the data have to be shared and the platforms have to be in place, Chris, back to your Sec DevOps, that information has to be there at the ready, the right information, and able to execute and take action on in an instant.
So we've got another question here that I think has been a topic of discussion a lot, especially in ATARC, and so I'll ask the question and kind of phrase a little bit more into it. But are you operating with a single cloud provider or multi-cloud? What are the challenges you wish you had solutions for? And I think, the funny thing is, I think there's different definitions, right? And so we had a session, ATARC had a multi-cloud session not too long ago and hosted it. And one of the things we really kind of got into was, defining things is really important, I think, nowadays, right? That, you know, because there are so many terms that are being thrown out. I mean, zero trust is a good one of, okay, well, what, you know, what is that? Where are we going? And to your point, right now, it's really moving to the application layer. Well, in the multi-cloud and the cloud environment, you know, what are you guys doing in, you know, in the Marine Corps, and then the security parameters around it?
Oh man, let me tell you, this is one of my favorite subjects. I tell you, I like to tell everyone, we are so vendor agnostic. Marine Corps does not discriminate. If we can use it, we're going to try. If we can get it in our environment, we're going to use it. So we do have a multi-cloud environment. There are many different vendors. So when I define multi-cloud, I mean cloud services that are being taken advantage of and consumed that is offered by different vendors, whether that's DISA from a commercial perspective, whether that's AWS, whether that's Azure, whether that's the O365 environment for SharePoint Online. You reach out to Air Force, you got a little Google going on. In some places of the services, you got IBM Watson, a little artificial intelligence. There is a vendor agnostic approach, and there are many vendors who are providing cloud services. To answer the question of what are some of the problems we wish we had the answer to. How do I make it work? No matter whose it is, no matter who is the backbone of services, whether the SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, and security as a service. We won't talk about that either, but okay. Whoever's providing it, can you please make it work in a DDoS? How can we get it in a DDoS environment? Degraded, they're deployed, there's intermittent connectivity, and sometimes it's limited because our experiences here now, like I said, in the very first 3 minutes of this call, 10 gigabytes is needed for cloud services. That's a minimum. Depending on what I'm doing, I may saturate your network at 12 to 13 gigabytes. That's where I've seen a peak when we are capacity and load testing based on what a particular warfighting environment could look like. Data coming off of F-35s, making sure you can process that data, process it very quickly, getting it to the commanders, multiple commanders now, not just the guy in the cockpit, but people that, you know, the warfighter that's on the ground. And every time I talk about it, I speed my voice up just subconsciously because of how intense that environment is and how fast you have to think. Being a person who was deployed with the Army on the medical side, it's very fast paced. You have a helo coming in, you got people screaming on the radio, and you got doctors just trying to make sure they can save that person's life. So that is what I think about when I think about war fighting. And I relate back to that experience. Now tell me how I'm gonna do that in the cloud. Now the radios I can control locally. The fax machine, in order to communicate back to the Pentagon, unfortunately, if I have to communicate bad news on a bad day, those are things I control because my comms team was right beside me. Now what I have to deal with is a vendor whose house I'm trying to live in, whose furniture equals my data that I've given to them to put in their house. And oh, by the way, what they're telling me is, Ms. Spinks, you got to do all these things in order to access it. You either got to have SATCOMs, and we already know in a bad day, Marine Corps is not the priority for SATCOMs, right? But you need the connectivity. So that's the problem that I'm wishing we could solve. The Department of Navy is focused on that. We got a lot of MCTISA out in California. That's actually a RDT&E project that we're working with Microsoft. How do you make our collaboration and communications, emails, PowerPoints, Excel, and Access, because a lot of us use a lot of relational databases and things like that. How do you make it work in a degraded environment? Oh, by the way, we got applications that we have to move at the ready. If it is not local to me, and it's, you know, sitting in someone's data center that I don't control, operate, configure, or actually have full administrative rights to, how do I make that work in the Philippines in a fight? That's the problem that, you know, it's easy to solve. How can you transition to the cloud and have all of the Pentagon, the fourth estate, you know, things like that? How can you get them access in O365? I will not say it is not a complicated process, but it is an easy problem to solve. The process is complicated because there's some configuration, solution architecture, et cetera. But the problem is easy to solve. We got the answer. Now we just got to figure out the how.
How?
We don't have the answer for DDoS. We don't. So that's the thing that's on the minds of all the way up to the Secretary of Navy and the Department of Defense. How do you make this thing work down at SOCOM? How do you make those things work for SOCOM in a secure environment? Because, you know, our Marines working with SOCOM, that's Army, you got Air Force, they're doing their thing. How do you do it with a risk accepted model in the midst of limited connectivity, intermittent connectivity, deployed or degraded, like aboard a ship? How you make it work? I hope someone has that answer. If they have it, give it to me.
That's your call to answers.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that, you know, the Department of Navy, you know, Mr. Wise and General Glavy, they're all pushing hard, and the DoD CIO, it's right on the tip of their tongue as they engage with all the vendors as well. This team of teams approach to solve the problem of having data at the ready when we need it, no matter where we are, with a risk accepted security model. Those are a lot of requirements in that one sentence, but
Right.
it's necessary.
Yeah, no, absolutely is. Tom, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. So let's talk about supply chain. You know,
Okay.
what is Marine Corps doing in the supply chain realm? Like every other, trying to get a handle on what products they're using, and then finding out where they originated from, and what level of trust do you have? How much of a handle do you have on it yet?
So I think we're always a learning institution. Our acquisition community is very heavily involved with our product lines, our capabilities development, and integration team, CD&I. We have taken a cross-functional team approach to our information environment. We've always done that. It may be called an OPT. It may be called an offsite. Now it's called cross-functional teams. Whatever you call it, lots of different brains in the room bringing different expertise to problem solve. The acquisition checks that have been in place for forever is occurring. Now, are there areas where even vendors get sophisticated? Even vendors could, I mean, what you're seeing now are attacks at the factory level. You know, people are doing replicas. They are pirating a lot of designs and trying to obfuscate or make their products look the way they're supposed to look because they do know those parameters. So what we try to do is make sure that our security personnel are involved with our acquisition teams, but also there is a focus that has been in place for about 2.5 years now that I've been there with our, what we call our PEOs, our program executive offices within the Navy. And that entire acquisition team, they take coursework as well. They get academia to understand what are the supply chain risks that you should be looking for. What are the questions that you should be asking? And then there's a test and evaluation environment that we just don't, zero trust. We don't just accept your technology. You may just so happen to win, you know, as a vendor, you may win an equipment supply based contract. We don't just accept it in our environment. There are parameters and checks that the acquisition team goes through. We do code analysis. We execute impact analysis from a security perspective. There are many checks that we have in place to try as best as we can to minimize the risk we are accepting, knowing that we have supply chain at the forefront that hasn't 10 to 15 years ago. It existed, but it was not as prevalent. So, you know, everything has kind of been heightened. So that's how we're addressing it. So education from an academia perspective, meaning here's what right is supposed to look like. But then there's an intel side that says, here's some of the things you may see that could look like right. Here is some of the easily or not so easy areas that you can identify. It's kind of like training your workforce to identify a phishing email. You know, there's subtle differences that your bank is not going to send you, right? Your bank is not, you know, the banks do it very well to say, we will never ask for your information online, and we will never ask for your social security. So it's the same thing. We make sure our acquisition professionals understand, here's what we're seeing from an intel perspective. Here's what Cyber Command is saying they're seeing. Here's what industry is saying that they are seeing. So we have to make sure we understand those parameters so that those flags go up, and we, as best as we can, stop it in the proactive piece. You heard the sister, you know, the sister testimony, being proactive, stopping those intrusions before they occur, right? But just in case some things slip through the crack, how do we respond? And that's why segregation of your network is so important. That's why role-based access control is so important. That's why having a space where all that data is collected so that your artificial intelligence and machines can learn what Ms. Spinks customarily does. She usually works from home for her calls in Tyson's Corner area. Well, why is she trying to log in California? Yes, it's still within the United States, but she's usually not logging in there. So there are some parameters that are in place. And, you know, unfortunately, you get this pop up of the screen, please put your PIN number in again. You know, please do this, please do that. What is this? You have different questions. And then if you're like Ms. Spinks, you just say, you know what, let me call the help desk. Let me identify myself, employer ID. Here's the IP address I'm probably pinging from. Here's the location I am at. Here's the Wi-Fi I'm trying to connect to. So then they can tell the machine, this is okay. And then when it changes, it's kind of, you know, the way I like to think about it is, it's like when you tell your bank you're going on vacation and you just may so happen to use your debit card. You live in Louisiana, but you're in California. Because if you don't, the sophisticated level of banking now is you get a text message and a phone call. Don't answer it, your phone, your card gets turned off, right? Same philosophy. If you don't answer the right questions, if you're not available for a check, then we're going to assume breach. And if we are erroneous, two things is going to happen. You're going to pick the phone up. You're going to call and say, hey, this is Ms. Spinks. I'm so and so and so. Okay, ma'am, it's just a little bit of anomaly. Wasn't sure. We'll reset you, pull you out of read-only access. And in some cases, we will isolate you just in case it's some critical information. It's like, oh, no, you're not getting in at all. You're going to have to come in and talk to somebody because the level of risk is higher versus in some spaces. So that's how we approach that supply chain. It's many checks. It's not a one-way, you know, instead it's like going down 95 and having different exits. It really depends on where we're trying to go in that supply chain check to be the path that we're going to take. But it starts with our CD&I team and our acquisition professionals.
So we got about 6 minutes left. I'm gonna hit you with what probably is gonna take more than 6 minutes, but it's one of the first things that you talked about as kind of the lessons learned, and we kind of covered it here on the supply chain discussion, is the acquisition side, right? And I think from a pandemic standpoint, we've seen, you know, new approaches from the cloud and the speed of technology. I think we're starting to see new approaches, but how are you experiencing, I guess, both the positives and the negatives around acquisition as technology evolves and as we're in this state? And maybe if you don't want to call them negatives, maybe the challenges that
Well, I don't think it's a secret that the challenge when you hear acquisition in one sentence, it's the same thing when you hear cybersecurity. Most people see a stop sign in their head. They see stop signs. I deal with it my entire career. As soon as I say, well, I work in cybersecurity, they're like, oh man, don't let her in. Don't let her in because she's going to tell us we can't deploy, right? So it's the same thing with acquisition. Unfortunately, reputationally, they are, it could be known, or it's often said that they are stop sign personnel. They are blockers. And it's not blockers because you can't deploy. It's blockers because the process takes so long. By the time the technology or capability is delivered, it's either outdated, don't need it anymore, or it doesn't do what we need it to do, right? So the lessons learned in the COVID-19 pandemic of a workforce that had to have capabilities that did not exist, meaning telework, plussing up VPNs to make sure that the path to getting to the network was as secure as possible. The commercial virtual remote environment was something the Department of Defense, Mr. Dana Deasy, and then now the deputy at that time, who's now the DoD CIO, Mr. Sherman, championed. How do we get that access and make it secure as possible? It taught us, unfortunately, that the acquisition process does not have to be slow. And what I will say is it should not take an emergency for that to become a business efficiency that we talked about earlier, just a way of living, a way we do things. Now, there are parameters that you have to consider, because sometimes if you go too fast, you can make a mistake that if you otherwise took your time in certain areas, you probably would have mitigated that risk. So it's a delicate scale balance. And that's where we need the team of teams approach to pull those heads together. But the good part about it is a lot of stuff of how we can have rapid acquisition. People like Ms. Spinks don't have to figure that out. People like Ms. Kathleen Hicks at the Secretary of Defense's office has already provided some parameters. And here's some authorities that you can take advantage of. Not just other transactional authorities, not just sole sourcing and justifications. And yes, we have the IDIQs, and sometimes we have many different other traditional avenues, but they're getting after how do we speed up the acquisition process? And it's not to skip steps, but it's all about standardizing steps, which is what gets you velocity. You still have to take those steps. We still have those parameters. There's still risks we cannot accept within the acquisition community as well as in the security space. But the balancing of the scales is standardizing, finding ways to, we talked about shared services. There's many ways that rapid acquisition can take place, whether that's in software lifecycle development, whether that's taking advantage of shared services. The ATO process can also speed up a lot of that. So you hear that readiness, cyber readiness, and continuous monitoring that we've been talking about within the industry as well as within the Department of Defense. So all of that, in my opinion, helps the acquisition process, because if I can get to the ATO in a day and I have continuous monitoring, it allows my acquisition professionals to just focus on paying the invoice to the people that's giving me that capability. And then we can start to insert more capabilities and more requirements while operations is not being affected. So that's, if I could wave a magic wand, that's what that would look like. But I think there's some paths and some roadmaps that have been put in place present day. And that's, other transactional authority contracts, RDT&E contracts, but there's some rapid acquisition documents out there that are giving us some road space, and we just got to take advantage of it.
Well, this was awesome. And
yeah,
go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just really wanted to appreciate that, the last 15 minutes or even the whole session, you've been really alluding to how well the CXOs have been working together to solve problems.
Yeah.
It's become more of a global issue than just the CIO or CISO, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're all at the same level, whether their pay grade is or not. They're all dealing with the same problems collectively, and I think that's probably a good way to finish it. Chris, I got to drop, but thank you very much. I wanted to say hello. I wanted to say goodbye to Renata for joining us.
So Renata,
thanks so much,
Chris is going to take a quick snapshot of for posting, and then we'll thank you everybody for joining. Chris. All right. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
All right. Thank you.